For Paul, the heart is the center of our moral being. For Paul, the heart is the place of our decision making. For Paul, the heart is the place that we experience the presence of God. For Paul, the heart is the place that moral compass is contained. For Paul, the heart is the place we decide who we are. It's the place we decide who we will serve. It's that place that Paul prays that we can perceive the gifts of God, the gifts of faith. It's from that place that Paul asks that we might perceive and embrace God's gifts and God's empowerment for our lives. Hope, the empowerment of the faith community, the indwelling of the greatness of God's power in Jesus Christ in our lives. Through the eyes of that heart. It's almost as if Paul is asking us to see, not through the eyes in our head, or hear through the ears on the side of our faces. It's as if Paul is asking us to find a new place from which we might perceive the world. I don't know, maybe I've used too many words to explain this. How about this simple little exercise that might help you get what I'm talking about here? I need you to participate. Just for a second, those of you who aren't holding children, I don't want you to drop any babies or anything, but would you please just point at yourself for a second? It's interesting when we're asked to point at ourselves, we never point at our toe, do we? Point at yourself. I didn't see anybody. Even those who operate more out of logos than pathos, logic and reason, rather than emotion or feeling. On rare occasion, if you ask them to point at themselves, they might do this, but rarely. Even those who operate out of reason and logic and are linear A-type thinkers will point here to the center of our being. That's where Paul wants us to begin perceiving the gifts of God, begin embracing, begin choosing, begin perceiving the world from this place, from the center of our being. It's as if Paul wants us to begin looking at the world, not the way the world sees itself, but perhaps the way God sees the world. Paul wants us to begin looking at each other and the world the way God looks at us and the way that God looks at the world. Do you know there's a beautiful old story about a mother who takes her kids to the nursing home to visit Grandpa on a Sunday afternoon. Her kids are about 8, maybe 10 years of age, a boy and a girl. And she says, Grandpa needs our friendship now. He's getting used to this nursing home and he needs us to visit in assisted care living. And so they go to the nursing home and the kids are feeling a little uncomfortable about this place. It smells different than any other place they've been before. And while they enjoy visiting with Grandpa in his room, it's not like visiting Grandpa in his home. This is a strange environment. And after they visit with Grandpa for a while, they roll Grandpa in his wheelchair down the hallway to the cafeteria, where they gather with a bunch of other residents from the nursing home in a makeshift sanctuary, a makeshift chapel where they can worship on Sunday afternoon. And as they begin worshiping, the kids are getting more and more uncomfortable. They recognize that people look different here. It's not like church where they go to church, and it's not even like the church they used to go to when Grandpa lived in his own house. In fact, in this place, there's one person who seems like he's asleep. There's another person who can't sit upright. She's sort of hunched over, and she keeps banging the table in front of her and shouting, "Nurse! Nurse!" And when they begin to sing the hymns, what a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear, the kids start snickering and giggling behind Grandpa's back because they don't sound like that at all. To the kids, they sound like, what a friend we have in Jesus. Nurse! Nurse! You've been in that environment. It's an uncomfortable place, especially for an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old. And the giggling and the snickers are starting to make Mom fume. She's embarrassed for the way her children are behaving. She's angry and indignant that Grandpa might even spot them. You can almost see steam rising off her head as these kids giggle away and make their jokes. But she doesn't say anything. She just sort of bites her tongue for a moment. And after worship is over, and they take Grandpa back to his room, and they're walking out to the parking lot, and they get in the car. Mom doesn't turn the key to start the car. She looks at her daughter in the front seat, and she looks at her son in the rearview mirror in the back seat. She breathes one of those heavy, wordless sighs, a prayer too deep for words, right? She's just trying to get some focus, and thankfully she starts seeing this not as a mother with anger or frustration about her kids, but she starts seeing it through the eyes of the heart, enlightened. And instead of blasting the kids, she turns to her daughter and her son and she says, "Grandpa and his new friends made you a little uncomfortable, didn't he?" And they went, "Oh yeah, of course. You thought they sounded pretty funny and looked pretty funny in worship today, didn't you?" And her son from the back seat goes, "Well, of course, did you see that one guy? He looked retarded." She still didn't blast them or scold them. She said, "Maybe that's because you see Grandpa and his new friends through the eyes in your head. And you heard Grandpa and his new friends singing through the ears on the side of your face." And her daughter says, "What do you mean, Mom? What do we have beside our eyes and our ears?" And she said, "I bet you if you could hear Grandpa singing and see his friends in worship the way God sees them, I bet you would have seen and heard the most angelic choir you would have ever experienced in your life." Friends, Paul asks us to perceive the world around us, not through eyes in the head or ears on the side of our faces, but through the eyes of the heart, that we might catch a glimpse of the world and catch a glimpse of one another the way that God sees us and the way that God perceives us in this world. But you know what? I was thinking maybe that's why we're here anyway. Maybe that's why we've gathered here this Sunday morning. Oh, maybe because somebody called you and said they wanted to honor you today, or maybe somebody called you and said, it's Joseph's baptism, you have to be there. But I don't think so. I think we gather in faith because we know for some mysterious reason, when we gather as the people of God to worship, to study, to pray, to preach, to sing, to lift up our voices, we catch a glimpse of something we don't see anywhere else. For a moment, even for just an hour and a few minutes, we catch a glimpse through the eyes of the heart. We catch a glimpse of ourselves in a world perhaps the way God perceives us. Out there, every day, gosh, there's so many things that blurs our vision, aren't there? Just so many things that'll steer us off track, so many things that'll get that inward spiritual compass spinning in all directions, and we can't find true north anymore. And yet we come in here on a Sunday morning, dragging our tired and weary bodies, and we're rubbing our world-weary vision. And at least for an hour or so, we're able to see through the eyes of the heart perhaps how God sees us. We go away from this place saying, wow, the view from here is pretty spectacular. I guess my prayer is that when we leave today, that when we leave this sacred space and this sacred time together, that we might enter that world once again with our vision being restored. Not this vision, but the vision of our hearts. The eyes of our hearts seeing clearly once again, so that in this world we might perceive it the way God perceives it. So that when we see one another and see strangers on the street or in our workplaces or in our study places, we might see them as God sees them.